All right. So to hear that, let us make human beings in our image, in our likeness. In this ancient world, the language of image and likeness was the language that you would find carved at the bottom of a statue. It was interchangeable with a real figure, right? And that figure was fully identified with the God that it represented. It was considered to be a living being, and that the statue itself, even though it was motionless and dumb, it was considered alive. So there would be what they would call a spiration ceremony, and once usually it was 6 days, please pay attention, note these things. These did not start with Genesis 1. In this ancient world, if God wanted to show up in Indonesia right now, how would he have to make himself known? He'd have to use your language. He'd have to find images within your culture that make sense to you. He would have to tell your story his way and his story in a way that you could understand. That is what's happening in Genesis. So the language of image and likeness, listen to how they're hearing this, because the world around them already hears it, including them. That when you created a temple and a palace usually had a garden attached. So the temple is the place of worship, and it's the place of divinity, and it's bigger than the palace, as it should be, because it's the place of divinity. Interestingly, they're usually attached. When the king or the ruler is deriving their power from that divine figure, so that they exercise their legal justice, their enactment of the law. Think of Solomon, sitting there, people bringing their issues to him, the women with the child, they're fighting for. The palace, Solomon's unbelievable palace, is also attached to this unbelievable temple, and he is administering this justice and wisdom on behalf of God, as God's representative on earth. It's way later. But in this context, there's also beautiful kind of gardens, because this is just the evidence that there's water, that there's life, that the one who holds the authority over life and death. When this construction is finished for whatever this God would be who is being worshipped, the image would be brought in, it'd be kind of rolled in, as it were, and then the priests of that particular divinity would pray the prayers of invocation. This is what I just watched you do last Friday or last Saturday and Sunday. Come, Holy Spirit, be with us, be among us. That's a prayer of invocation, invoking the presence of the Lord. They would invoke the presence of the God, and they would do this incantation, and if they did it right, they would expect and trust that the God would come and dwell and rest in and on that image. And that's what made it alive, all right? Even though it didn't look alive, and how many of you ever heard or seen of this silly movie back in the States, Midnight in the Museum or something like that, where like all the figurines like come to life and the little kids, like our kids used to watch this movie. That is not what they thought was happening when they went home. That somehow the God was busy eating the food that had been put in front of them. But the sense that where the image was, so was the God. Very, very definitely the case. Next slide. A story to just make this so clear is that in 332 BC, Alexander the Great was basically, he decided that he was God and was moving his way through this kingdom and just kind of conquering all the kingdoms in front of him. And as he would come to these major kingdoms and these major city-states, he'd give them the option. He'd be like, look, I could either devastate you, Or you could bring your gods out to me. And you can roll them out and you can derobe them because, by the way, those gods were robed more beautifully than any king or queen. Because what human being would ever dress better than a god, right? So he'd say, you take that off and you come and you dress me with the stuff of your god and you lay that god down because I'm here and the fact that you've just given up to me just tells you who's more powerful. Or we could have a battle. And then I'll just win. And then I'll take all that stuff a different way. Now, when he comes to Tyre, their primary god is Apollo. And somebody has a dream that Apollo is going to abandon them in the middle of the battlefield while they are fighting Alexander. And so they do have this battle, but they haul that image right out into the middle of the battlefield, and they tie the feet of this image to the cart so it can't go anywhere, as if it's going to go somewhere. But do you hear how, that's how real, and it's not because they're dumb, it's because they assume that where the presence of the image is, that's where the God is, and we can't let those things separate. So next slide. In the ancient world, this would be Astarte, and my goodness, she would have never shown up like this. She would have been beautifully garbed and beautifully adorned with jewels and linen clothing and the most royal everything, and you will hear that description in Ezekiel in a minute. But she would have been manufactured from the things of the earth, cast, and then set in this temple palace garden. And you know what day they're set there? It's on the 6th day. They've had a big worship service. They've had a big celebration service. And on day 6, they set the image in place. And then when the prayer is done, the priests do this. They go, they breathe on this image. They spirate on this image. And they are given permission to give breath to the image, to bring it alive. And then things work. Once Astarte is set up in her temple, once she's adorned, once she's robed, once she has been spirated, once she has been set forth, once worship happens, then what happens on the 7th day? People do not sit around and cross their arms and call that rest. Gosh, it's so great we got all the work done. Let's just hang out for a day. Rest meant now things will function the way they're supposed to. Now things work. Now Astarte, or God, in Genesis, on the 7th day is resting and dwelling, and things can get on with finally being what they were meant to be. Next slide. The bottom of this massive statue, if I were standing next to this statue, you could see by the rope, it would just, I wouldn't even come to his knees. And in the bottom of that, there's a little description, and it says this: the image, the Tselem, the likeness demut of King Hadad Isi of Gazan of Syria. The language Tselem and demut, that is what you find in your Hebrew Bible when you read, let us make them in our Tselem. Let us make them in our demut. That's not reason or spirit. That's concrete, physical, tangible. You should be able to see and touch and know what this God looks like in the world. So, next slide. That's what that's saying. Do you hear that? I never knew that. That God thought that when people looked at me, it wasn't just the nice things that I was doing, and I hope I wasn't cross with somebody in the line at the grocery store, or cut somebody off in traffic, which in Indonesia doesn't exist, I know that. Compared to where I live, this is where our road rage is different than yours. This is not the sign of being a Christian, or that I'm saying all the right things. It's that people should be able to watch every single aspect of my embodied life in relation to another life and go, that's what God looks like? Wow. I'd like to know that. That's who you are. You are God's image. You are his salam, his demut in the world. Next slide. Now, the choice of using that language is either really careless or it's really profound. Because this is a world of idols. And I prayed so much about whether we were going to give this talk or not before I came here, because you live in a country that has a lot of idolatry. I'm going to get wrong word. Have a lot of idols as part of culture and religion and ethnic culture that's part of tradition. Our really mixed bag of things in the States, folks from all over the world bring that as well, but people keep it under wraps. Our idols they have brand names. Ferragamo is an idol. Gap, Apple. It's not just stuff, it's the things that make you want to be identified and associated by something, right? The minute you've got a label, bless your heart, you get to decide whether that narrative is your primary narrative or you get to be the salam and demut of the living God. But in this context, it's so much more profound. And in your country, it's so much more profound. And I want you to hear this because this is part of how you get to tell the good news in Indonesia in a way that is so much more real than I can get hold of my brothers and sisters in the United States. Because they just think idol, oh, we don't have those if you're white, or whatever. It's ridiculous. It's a very hard concept. And for Christians, all they think of is idol equals idolatry, and we're not supposed to be idolatrous, so of course we don't do that, even though we all do that. So I'm actually delighted. I'm also not surprised I got really, really sick. And again, it's a virus. It could be a lot of things. But, there have been certain times when I knew what the Lord asked me to do, and I've come to do it, and boy, I just get sick. Lots of stuff just gets thrown because it's like, no, you're not supposed to talk about this stuff. So I'm giving it to you because I think it's yours. I think it's for you, for God to be doing something unique with you as well as with me in my context. It is really radical language. Next slide. Because what it's really saying is that human beings are God's living idols. God has something to say about idols that you make or that I make. But he loves the icon. The icon is the Greek word for image. The icon or the idols that he's made in the world, they're called human beings. Deep breath. We all been told, don't have idols. You know why he says that? Because you're it. And if you've made them, then you've given away your own identity and you've given away my identity in the process. This is a word he wants you to claim hold of again. Icon, image. Grab it, live into it as men and women. because he wants the world to know who he is, and the only place that they can find out who he is not by you giving them a Bible tract. It's by you being the child of your Father and say, I'd like to invite you to know that you're in the family too. Want to come home? And then have them look at your life and go, I do actually. Instead of look at your life and go, well, actually, not so much, thanks very much. Sorry, Oyan, I didn't mean to look at you. I'd like to be in Oyan's image-bearing family. Next slide. This is what it means for us to be image bearers. That we would be God's embodied vice regents of God's living presence. That we would speak and see and hear and act and move for God in the world. Remember when Daniel got put in the lion's den and the three were put in the fire, Shadrach, Abednego, I can't even say their names today. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Part of the deep challenge was that Nebuchadnezzar was putting up massive images, like that one I just showed you of King Hadad-Esi. And where that image was the image of the suzerain, which was Nebuchadnezzar. Way on the outskirts of his territory, saying, you might not see me, and you might feel like I am really far away and don't see what's going on with you, but it doesn't matter the distance. My image is here, my authority is here, my presence is here, and oh, by the way, I'd just like everybody to bow down and worship, so we are very clear who is in charge here. That's why those guys are in trouble, because they won't do it. Because that's the power of an image. It functions in that way. And when a king cannot be there, if he puts an image there, or he puts an icon, or he puts that idol, for lack of a better word, if he isn't sending a living representative, he's sending that image there to say, this is my vice regency, my assigned authority that I place here. So you function not just as people who get to have life in the Spirit, which means you get to feel excited during worship. You are people who are being filled with the power of the living God upon the earth so that you can minister God's love and mercy and grace and authority to call forth life and to say no to what is not of God. No more. I stood with my husband over these last 2 days, 16th floor, watching a protest where people are shouting for 8 hours a day. What was outside the Kapik building? I'm not going to say it right. I probably just said a very bad word in Indonesian. But the anti-corruption demonstration, right? And things are being thrown, and the police are pushing, and people, because they're desperate to, somebody was there going, no more. I don't like it the way it is. I don't understand the issue, so I'm not going to say one way or the other who was doing right or wrong in that moment, but that's exactly what God thinks your life is about. That where you're standing, people are very clear about what God looks like, about what God cares about who God cares about. He wouldn't necessarily want you to be throwing things and pushing things, because actually his life looks cruciform. So he says, throw it at me and throw it at my children, because what could you do? Kill them by the powers of this world? Nothing can separate them from the love of God that is in Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ wears their new humanity. And nothing will separate them from their final destiny. So bring it on. My children are ready for it. My children will go anywhere with me. Jesus says, what I'm looking for is the fact that I have brothers and sisters who are being conformed to the image of the Son. That is what the Father's doing. That he is not ashamed to call you brothers and sisters, when you're fearful and afraid, myself included this week. But to say, I'm not ashamed of them or worried about them, but I do want them to be part of what I'm doing. That's what I made them for. They just lost their way, and they lost their authority and their empowerment. So I had to come and get it by being one of them and being one with them, and then being able to give it back to them, so that now they join me in what I'm still doing with what the Father's doing. That's what we're doing. That's our Christian story. Next slide. In fact, I'm going to ask you so that's sort of a recap of what I just said there. Again, next slide. If you notice the progression through the Old Testament, the pattern of creation and then Exodus and then new creation happens over and over again. God, in the story of Eden and Genesis 1 and 2, sets this beautiful storied image of what it looks like for God to dwell with his human image-bearing children upon the earth and to give them dominion. He does not give them domination. He gives them dominion. And dominion means that they are the children of Shalom. They are the children who bring forth life. They call forth and name things into life. They bring forth and make sure that all that they're called to do is to bring forth the flourishing of what God has already said yes to being. So guess who weeps on our behalf as well as his world when you can't pick up a cup of water in the deepest parts of the ocean anywhere right now and not find bits of plastic? Or a whale comes up on the shore this summer and is dead because of the garbage of the inefficiency and the lack of care and shalom, of the domination of humanity over creation for utilitarian purposes, because we've put ourselves as idols at the center of our own story to hell in a handbasket with the future generations or the creation that God loves. When what he made us for was to be with and for the created order as we are to be with and for him. I don't know how to, enough said there, we know. This story says that the first thing we know is that image bearing goes south really fast. And the challenge with the image bearer in the way the story is generated is, will you really be who you are? Really? Really? Did God say? Really? Do you really trust him? Because actually he's a liar. Did God really say you shouldn't eat from? I don't think you should trust God. God does not have your best interests at heart. How is that not the human story 37,000 times a day? Does Satan not say, I know that actually you're supposed to lean into the Lord on this one, but actually if you just take this one yourself and carry it a little bit, you could probably do just as well as him, maybe a little better. That's idolatry. And when they fall, this is. Do you hear Jesus in the desert? Really? Did God say? Really? You're the Son of God? Really? How about you do it this way and don't trust him for the things that he's said? This is why he's called our new Adam. He has to go through the whole story that is the human story in his life. And his whole life has to pull off a different story. I felt bad the other day when I was preaching saying the cross is not the center of our story. It actually isn't the center of our story. Jesus is the center of our story. And I'm just going to keep putting him there. We don't have a Jesus who isn't the crucified Jesus. But if we just had Christ crucified, we have nothing. If we have Jesus crucified, raised, and still human, doing something to bring us home, we have everything. But if all we do is keep looking backwards at the cross as some kind of sin cleansing mechanism, instead of actually getting a true human life back, we don't know what our story is. So please don't hear me putting the cross in any place it isn't. It's just in a very gorgeous, centerpiece, beautiful place in this career of Jesus' life. And you want the whole thing. You want somebody who has undergone our whole story and actually answered differently than the way that we did. There, the image bearer fell by saying, actually, I think I will trust me more than God. And as that story plays out, they have an exodus out of Eden, an exile. And then you watch this happen again. So in the first story, it's creation that comes out of the chaos of the waters. And then the next story is water and Noah. And what? The Holy Spirit hovering over the water in the form of what? A dove. Doesn't that sound familiar? In the life of Jesus at his baptism in the Jordan. God loves this stuff, you guys. He wants you to see the picture image. He wants you to see that and go, all those gongs are going off from all the times we've heard this. If it's not Noah and then a spirit, then it's the Red Sea, and then it's Jordan, and then it's Jesus in the Jordan, and then it's us as people born of the Spirit and baptized into the waters of new life. God loves imagery, and he wants you to understand how to be able to tell a story that isn't a bunch of propositional truths. It's your life story. And it's everybody's life story, and you need to be able to invite them into it and let them see those patterns play out. So that multiple Eden, the flood, Egypt, just keep recognizing how this works. But as they come through the Jordan and God sort of pulls them first out of Egypt through the Red Sea, and they begin to tell their creation story out of that experience, this is when I tells them already who they're going to be. And they give up on this before they even get there. It's too hard. It's too hard of a calling. They've lived 400 years. Bless those Israelites. I was so hard on them as a kid. I would be like an 8-year-old in Sunday school, just like, how come those Israelites can't hold on to their life with God for more than like a week? Because this week I'm reading another story of it. And then I'd go home and beat up on my brothers after just doing worship in Sunday school. I was an Israelite. I was a Pharisee. I still am. But I kept thinking, why was it so easy for them to not get the plot? And I finally realized in my nation, we call the United States of America a country as if it began its country history 400 years ago. As if suddenly, just out of nowhere, this continent was there, and it was there for the taking, and here we are. And okay, so we tell our story this way as English speakers in the United States. 400 years ago, last week was the first time that slaves were brought to the shores of the United States. There's a lot going on there. When I try to think of the time, the distance of 400 years from then to now, think about how long that was. That's a long, long time. That is how long these Hebrews were in Egypt. The only people who God had showed up to before them were 3 generations of one family. A guy named Abraham, his not very interesting son Isaac, and his really creepy grandson, Jacob. And then God doesn't mind coming back 400 years later and saying, me, Yahweh, burning bush, I am that I am, I'm also the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm the God of Cherith and Robert and Arlene and Oya, and I don't mind being their God by name. I mean, if you think God isn't for you, his name is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Go read their stories. Talk about kindness and mercy, and God's willing to get into our mess and then wear our name with his own name. But this God flourishes them, and then they get huge. But they are literally building the temples, the construction palaces of pharaohs. They are building the worship temples of the great gods of Osiris and Neph and Geb and Shut and Nut and all the gods that are part of the pantheon of the Egyptian gods for hundreds of years. They have not worshipped Yahweh. They haven't seen anything. They don't know what it looks like to be in their story. They need to see God's power encounter with Pharaoh as much as Pharaoh needs that power encounter. And Pharaoh thinks he is what? The image and likeness of Ra. Pharaoh. I am the incarnation of Ra, the sun god, upon the earth. And Moses, you're my half-brother, and we've run down these halls together when we were kids, but now I wear the authority of Ra. Bring it on. And Moses knows what the cost is there. This is image bearing. And when this people is brought out, they have seen these signs and wonders, but they don't know what to do with this story very long. And when Moses goes up for God to say, this is the kind of relationship I want to have with them, and oh, by the way, I'm going to give them some commandments. And it's not because the first thing I want to do is give them some rules so they just get in line and then feel bad all the time when they don't keep them. He says, what I want to do is to give them a plumb line that helps them to know who I am and who they're not. That I am God and there's no other God, and all the gods that were surrounding them are not gods, and that any other graven image isn't a god, and I don't want them making them and being confused by that. And I want them to look like me, so they're not going to steal. Why should they? I am the God of abundance who will give you everything out of my generosity and my love for you. So you will not covet that which does not belong to you, because you know what? I've given you a tribe and a people, and you belong to one another, so that what is one's is, in a sense, is the other's. So why would you covet what belongs to the family? Why would you commit adultery when that is the highest form, not just of sexual exploitation, it's theft. It's the breakdown of the fundamental covenant of God and his relationship with a people. Honor your heritage, your brother, your mother and father, because they are your life givers with me. Children of Shalom. Know who you are. And just in case you can't remember who I am and who you are, you need a day called Sabbath to just chill out and go, oh, that's right, I'm not you. But you look like this, and you've asked me to look like this in the world. They miss that. He gets down that mountain, and they're melting their jewelry and already going back to what they know, which is to make something familiar. And they pay that price. But when they come into a new land, God calls them to be a people, and he says, you will be a kingdom of priests for me. Now you will literally be given my authority to bear my presence, my character, my life, so that the world can look somewhere on the earth and see what I look like. And the reason that one of the things I have commanded you not to do is to make any graven idol. Don't make something out of creaturely stuff and call it a God idol, because that's you. And if somebody starts looking at that instead of you, they will think I look like that. And actually, I look like me. And they should be able to look at you to find out what I look like. And then you hear basically the unfolding of the rest of the Old Testament. And what is it a story of? Idolatry. It's a story of God drawing near and saying, could we try this again? You're my children. There's purpose here. There's life here. There's love here. And it's not just for you. I promised Abram that if he would be faithful to me, I would bring you to life, and through your life, all the nations of the world would be finally restored. There's something vital about who you are. This isn't just about being a Christian when it's convenient. You have a calling of God in the world. And he's saying to them, I need, in a world that is brutal and destroys its girl children, in a world that's brutal and sacrifices children of any kind in front of Molech, in a world that is brutal and wars and takes over, I want you to extend mercy to the stranger. I want you to widen your tent. I want you to minister hospitality where no one expects hospitality, because that's what I am like. I want mercy to be seen in cultures that don't even have that word in their vocabulary. I want the world to know who I am, because we made you before the creation of the world to be with us, to be for us, to be loved by us, to enact the power of our love. So here comes the challenge of idolatry. Next slide. Note these two terms. You are my son, you are my queen. Relational terms, one as family and one as marriage and authority. Okay? Next slide. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that's on earth beneath, or that's in the water under the earth. So very specific. Nothing within the created order is to take your place, because that would take my place. Okay? So the next slide. At the heart of this call to idolatry is actually this. It's that when Israel or we fall into idolatry, it's the refusal to actually fulfill our own vocation. It's not just don't make something. I love this in Isaiah where he's like, okay, the guy cuts down the tree and then he cuts it in half and he makes half of it into an idol and the other half he chops into wood to eat as breakfast, right? I mean, Isaiah could not be more derogatory about the lifelessness of the idols of Mesopotamia. And when he says Nebo bows low, and it's the language of basically a conquered people and the conquered idols being hauled out on carts out of the city. He is doing this in your face. But it's because in this context, that is not only him saying that's false, it's to say actually anything that you constructed could never be true, real. And real image-bearing is fleshy and concrete. So to fall into that trap for those who are Yahweh's children is a refusal to bear our own vocation. It's literally suicidal in the sense that it's our self-destruction. We've given away our life and the core of our being. And in the language of Ezekiel 16, which talks about the language of queen and glory, we give away the divine glory that comes by having the Spirit of God resting on us, living in us, moving in and among and through us. Next slide. So this is how specific, even in the worship psalms, Israel would sing this in these psalms. Psalm 82. The gods, quote, I love it, know nothing. They understand nothing. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. And then he turns around and says to his own people, and you will die like mere mortals. You will fall like any other ruler. Why? Because this psalm says, please come into my presence. It's very much like Isaiah 6 in a throne room, courtroom scene, because the throne room is the courtroom. And he says, come before me. We have a conversation we need to have. He says, people are hungry. People are suffering from injustice. Widows are being abandoned. Orphans are uncared for. And I am the God who is, and we don't know this yet until Jesus, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but we do know I am the God of Chesed and Emet, whose loving kindness extends beyond measure, and orphans are my children. They are not orphans. I am father to the fatherless, the caregiver and taker of widows. I have wed myself to them for their life and their goodness. How do I do that? Through my image-bearing children. So if orphans are alone, that is not my character. Somebody has dropped the ball. If a widow is not being cared for in a nation where she cannot, and in that ancient culture she could not, get her own job and fend for herself, God would care for her. How? Through the communion of the people. And if that is not happening, God goes, I hold you to account. You are to look like me, to bear my character. And he says, I have a beef with you because the world's watching you and they see that and they think that's what I look like. And he says, I made you like gods. And it's in quotes, actually, in the Old Testament, because he's trying to say, he wants you not to hear the word fake idols, but real idols. I've made you living image bearers. You should be able to manifest not just the authority to take in a widow and an orphan, but the authority of God that separates water and land, that brings forth justice, that heals out of death and despair. You have been given power from on high to do the things of God on the earth. That's what it means to be human, not what it means to be Superman Jesus. What it means to be human is to do the things that Jesus did. Can I say that again? When he does these wonderful, wild, wacky things, they look like what people did in the Old Testament when they were filled with the Spirit, actually doing what God wanted to do through his human children in that moment. And he wants your life to look like that. He wants my life to look like that. Tonight and tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more in detail about what that has meant for me and what I could encourage that in for you. So why Psalm 82 finishes out is basically you gave this up. You gave away your authority and you gave away. And so instead of being immortal, what are human beings that you are mindful of them? Little lower than the angels. We were made for immortality. He says, now you're going to die like any other mortal thing till I come to give you your life back. Unfortunately, that part isn't at the end of that psalm yet. But listen to it, how they sing it through Psalm 115. Images, these images that are idols, they have mouths, but they don't speak. Eyes that don't see, ears that don't hear, noses that don't smell, hands that don't feel, feet that don't walk. And Psalm 135 says almost exactly the same thing, and then it finishes out with this. And there is no breath in them. There is no ruach in them. They are not alive. They are running around, functioning and existing as semi-human. But the Spirit of God is not in them. In this case, these are actually stone or constructed idols. They can't do whatever they look like they should do because they are truly not alive. But when he calls out his people, he says, you look like what you worship. You look like what you worship. This is where he calls them to account. Hear you deaf. This is Isaiah 42, after he's said, comfort, comfort. I have not left my people alone. I'm going to bring her home. I'm going to do this amazing thing. I'm going to bring her a messianic comforter. But oh my goodness. Hear you deaf. Look you blind. Those who couldn't even hear, I want you to be able to hear this. If you can't see, I'm going to make sure you can see this. Who's blind like my servant Israel? And deaf like the messenger I send? Who's blind like the one in covenant with me, or like the servant of the Lord? You've seen many things, but have paid no attention. Your ears are open, but you hear nothing. I have given you eyes so that you would see what God sees. That you would see a world through God's eyes and love her and see her pain. I have given you ears to hear me. When I say you have the mind of Christ, that's not a metaphor. He's real and busy and has some very interesting ideas about how to get on with stuff in our world, and he'd love to tell you about it. But it would require that you would be listening by the power of the Spirit with ears that can hear what God would say to a world and change that world. That your hands and feet, that even the nose, the aroma of God's presence. When you walk into a space, you can smell what Paul says. To some, it smells like the aroma of life, and to others, it's the stench of death. And how many times have you been in a place where you go, something's funny here? Or you walk into a worship space, and it's not because they've just played those 3 worship chords that always are supposed to like make you love Jesus more and get all weepy. It's because actually you're like, something, I don't have any words for it. We need to say that to one another. I think God is here. Go, yeah, I think so too. I want to thank the sister who came up to me last week when I was so sick and I couldn't move. And she said to me in the corner mirror, I don't even know who it was because I couldn't see. I was shaking so hard. She said, you have a word. And she said, Satan does not want you to be here this week. And I thought, boy, you are absolutely right. Because I've been more confused and confounded about trying to figure out what to say to this church than I've been in a really long time. I mean, it's so easy to, I love telling about this. I love helping us know what our calling is. And it's been so fuzzy. Needing to see with the eyes and hear with those ears. So let's just finish this so that we can actually spend time over the, I assume that most of us who are here are church folk, so we'll move ourselves into tonight and tomorrow, kind of now thinking about how is Jesus asking us to see him as an image bearer, the image bearer who gives us ours back. Exodus, exile. Let's do the next slide. In Ezekiel 16, instead of me shouting at you, which I'm sorry to do, I guess it's a good thing. I'm not going to apologize for it. I'm doing the Gordon Fee lecture series. If anyone has ever heard Gordon Fee preach, I sound quiet. So, when they get challenged as a people through the major prophets, through Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, when Israel and Judah basically hear God say, look, we've been through this so many times. I am with you, I'm for you, my covenant is for you, I'm not going anywhere unless you ask me to. Because this is the last go. We've done this creation, Exodus, new creation, let's start again, let's try it again, try to be a new people for God's name again. Up, you fell, so okay, we'll pull you out of that and let's try it again. And it goes, okay, this is the last one. I'm giving you the chance to be who you are. And if you choose no, then you can have your choice. And I will keep my promise, and I will return, and I will do what I'm going to do, but you will not see it. And you will experience a very ugly exodus, and it will be an exile. And this exile, God bless you if you actually, me who delivered you from Egypt, you want Egypt to come in and rescue you from Assyria? Are you kidding me, he says. You want to make treaties and alliances and all this? Have at it. Because you have forsaken the truth again for a lie. This is idolatry, forsaking who you are and the truth for a lie. And this is the language. First of all, it comes in as God's son rejects him for an idol. And then Ezekiel 16 carries this language. Listen to this. This is what sovereign Yahweh says to Jerusalem. On the day you were born, your cord was not cut, nor were you washed with water to make you clean, nor were you rubbed with salt or wrapped in clothes. No one looked on you with pity or had compassion enough to do any of these things for you. Rather, you were thrown out into the open field. For on the day you were born, you were despised. I have a brand new baby granddaughter. And that is about having a girl baby in a culture where value of women is nothing. Why tie their cord? Just let them bleed out. Toss them in a ditch. They have no value. Then I passed by. And I saw you kicking about in your blood. And as you lay there in your blood, I said to you, live. I made you grow like a plant of the field, and you grew up and developed and became the most beautiful of jewels. Your breasts were formed and your hair grew, you who were naked and bare. Later I passed by, and when I looked at you and saw that you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, and you became mine. I married you. I bathed you with water, washed the blood from you, put ointments on you, and now listen to this. I clothed you with an embroidered dress and put leather sandals on you, and I dressed you in fine linen and covered you with costly garments, and I adorned you with jewelry and put bracelets on your arms and a necklace around your neck, and I put a ring in your nose and earrings in your ears and a beautiful crown on your head. So you were adorned with gold and silver. Your clothes were of fine linen and costly fabric and embroidered cloth. Your food was fine flour, honey, and olive oil. That's how you dress the high priest. That's how you dress a queen. That's how you dress an image. You became very beautiful and rose to be a queen. And your fame spread among the nations on account of your beauty, because the splendor I had given you made your beauty perfect, declares sovereign Yahweh. But you trusted in your beauty, and you used your fame to become a prostitute. You lavished your favors on anyone who passed by, and your beauty became his. You took some of your garments to make gaudy high places where you carried on your prostitution. You took the fine jewelry I gave you, the jewelry made of my gold and silver, and you made for yourself male idols and engaged in prostitution with them. And then the food I provided for you, you gave it to them, and then you took our sons and daughters, the sons and daughters you bore to me, and you sacrificed them as food to idols. And at the head of every street, you built your lofty shrine and degraded your beauty, and you spread your legs and increased your promiscuity to anybody who passed by. And in fact, you were unlike a prostitute because you scorned payment. At least a prostitute gets paid. You gave away your glory, the glory of the divine God, for nothing. And you killed our children in the name of Molech. And the world thinks I look like you. Now in Ezekiel 10, earlier he says, Son of man, I'm going to give you another vision. And he sees the presence of God lifting off the Ark of the Covenant with the wheels and the spinning, all those crazy images of Ezekiel. And it's so scary. Because he says, he gets to the threshold and he's like, Son of man, this is it. Are they with me? Are they not? Am I staying? Am I going? Where this is, where the temple is, where my presence is, you can count on me being there. But you seem to not want me, so am I staying or going? It's up to you. And then Ezekiel sees this. That's a little scary. And it happens. And the temple's destroyed. And for 400 years, again, there is no sign of the Spirit of God on the earth. It's not that God hasn't gone anywhere. It's that God doesn't have a people who are open to his presence. And he says, but regardless of what you do, I will pour out my Spirit. And this time, when I return with my Spirit, it's not going to be a covenant of stone and rules. It's going to be a covenant on your heart. We're going to go back to true image bearing, where instead of you having a priest who does these things for you, I am going to make a way so that you and I, heart to heart, voice to ear, eye to eye, once again by the Spirit of God, I will restore you to be my image bearing children. Joel, on my sons and daughters I will pour out my Spirit. Jeremiah, I will put my Spirit in you and you will live, and I will make a new covenant in you. My ruach of image bearing that I brought you into being with, oh, I will do it again. Ezekiel 37, Son of man, this valley of dry, dead human life, can it come to life again? I don't know, Lord, only you know. And he says, well, do what I did in Genesis 1. Because that's what I give you the authority to do as my image-bearing children, is to speak on my behalf in the power of the Spirit. So speak, Jeremiah, or speak, Ezekiel, speak to the breath and say, breathe. Speak to the bones. Speak to the tendons. Speak life out of death. Speak resurrection life upon the earth until all things are made new. Until I bring my Son of resurrection, who will teach you to speak what I say, who will only do what I do. But he'll have to do it the way you do it, because I'm not going to give him a divine credit card. I'm not going to give him any superpower. He's God with me. But if he comes among you, then this one who was God, but did not count equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Again, I'm seeing your beautiful sweaters. I'm pointing to you. If she can't do it any other way than the way she can do it, which is by the power of the Spirit, then Jesus isn't going to do it any other way. He's not going to do it with divine superpower and then say, oh, sorry, I had like a little extra access, but give it your best shot. He says, no, I am going to empty myself, not of my divine identity, but of my prerogatives to do things as the Son of God with my own divinity. I'm going to stay the divine Son and join my divine sonship to your humanity. And then by the Spirit that the Father promised, I'm going to try to live a life like yours, only I'm going to try to pull it off. And thanks be to God, he did, or we wouldn't be sitting here today. And tonight and tomorrow, we'll talk a little bit more about what his invitation is to lean into a life that he wants you to see didn't just dive bomb in AD 4 or -6 or whatever we think it is. It's Jesus coming as a man. Why? Because that was the place before the creation of the world that the Father, Son, and Spirit said, if you want to see what God looks like in the world, you look at human beings. That's why he's incarnate. Right? That's why he's incarnate. It's not an invasion. It's an entry. That's a permanent entry into our new creation life with him. So I'm going to pause there, give you the chance to take a deep breath, and I'm going to let Oyan, I don't know if with a microphone or whatever you would like to do, but I'm very happy to take questions or comments.